Well, here we are at episode 7 of
How's
the
it going,
podcast.
Rob?
Not too bad. And how are you? I hear you've had some storms in your part of the world.
Yeah, well, I don't think we got the worst of it, but it's affected the city pretty, how do I put it? In different kinds of ways. Some places didn't lose power. We lost power for about 25 hours. Some places didn't get power back till like yesterday. So,
Wow. Wow.
right, and it hit, what was it? The night of Wednesday, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was the night of Wednesday. And but it was a lot of fun. I mean, during the lack of power, I've uh, got back into a few things. Wrote some music,
Oh, yeah.
read books, that kind of thing. So,
That's right. You pick up one of these things. What's this? Doesn't require any batteries.
right, exactly.
No, yeah.
Yeah, we actually planned it ahead. You know, just in case we did lose power. There's a checklist of things I could be doing. So I did that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good plan. No, very good.
Mhm.
And I trust you keep some bottled water around and so forth, just in case there's
Uh,
contamination of the water supply.
that's basically the idea.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned, yeah, it's like it took a day or two, like 20, you had 25 hours, and some places were a couple, or probably even a few days actually, from the sounds of it.
Mhm.
And of course, that's the local electrical company going around doing all their work, and they're a good example of those invisible men who are
Yeah.
out there doing the stuff for society. I remember one night actually here, we had where I lived, we had a neighbor actually who decided, there's a little saying here, dial before you dig. The idea is you meant to call up the local electricity provider and check if there's any power lines underground before you start digging. Our neighbor didn't. And we were experiencing sort of brownouts in the house, and the computers rebooted a couple of times, and I decided I was going to shut all the computers off. There's obviously there was a bit of some sort of reliability problem with the power, so I shut all the computers off for a few hours.
Mhm.
And we found out later on neighbours were having the same thing, and they'd lost power. So it was New Year's Eve. I went off to a New Year's Eve party, and I came back to find this big cable running down the street past my driveway, right?
Yeah.
And in actual fact, yeah, the neighbour had taken out an underground power cable, and the local electricity provider had been there on New Year's Eve running this patch cable up the road so we all get our power back.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean these guys are great. They just get out there and get it done. And I don't know what the proportion is, but it'd be upwards of 95% male. Probably, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 98% male or something along those lines.
Mhm.
And yeah, they're out there. We call them the invisible men. They're out there and doing all those jobs that most of the time hardly anybody ever thinks about. And yeah, I'm sure they've had a very, very busy week in your part of the world.
Absolutely. And which one of them are going to get complaints for not being around the house enough?
Yeah. The poor guys are out there, probably in horrible weather too. In all honesty, they're out there doing this stuff, and yeah, it's horrible weather.
Yeah.
So everybody else could get their electricity back. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you'd think with the frequency of storms hitting this state here in Florida, it's almost kind of well renowned for it. It almost like it seems like the storms just travel up Florida as if a path, oftentimes. But you'd think Florida, my fellow Floridians would be better prepared and not go into complete panic. Because gasoline's all bought out, and it's an incredible pain finding anywhere with gasoline to actually buy, and some places that were, just the lines are so horrible.
yeah.
Right.
And probably, I suppose it'll correct over the next few days as they bring trucks in and stuff. But yeah, so yeah, that sort of hoarding thing. My advice is always to have a little bit of water around, a bit of food around. That way, if something does happen, and these things do happen, don't have to panic. Just batten down the house and wait it out for a few days.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. All right. So, mind if I start off with a subject?
Go for it. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So this is actually a follow-up to a promise I made on the last show. I promised I'd talk more about something along the lines of women in esports and such. So, and I think I didn't give a satisfactory kind of dissertation of what all happened. I think so. But this is again coming from a non-League of Legends player, a non esports player. But so I'll tell you what I've kind of gathered in a little bit more substantial detail. So
Yeah, great.
I spoke about Vivictus Esports before, but I think it was a team called Team Siren that first tried to attempt to do this whole all-female esports team, right? And that's what they were trying to really present themselves as. And they had this video called Introducing Team Siren, which played up the whole underrepresentation of women in esports and such. It kind of it's this really mock-worthy sort of video about we're women and we're in this to win, and really emphasizing that you can predict how
the whole girl power thing. Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah. And well, the problem was, it got the response you and I would probably expect. It was mocked very much, but they've gotten publicity almost exclusively for that, which it didn't do them favors, but it also did do them favors in terms of publicity, I suppose. So, here we are talking about it. Here I am talking about
it. The old art statement about any publicity is good publicity. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and the thing is, they disbanded about a month later that video came out, I think, and because it was just how do I put it? There was some infighting to begin with, right?
Right.
And they just couldn't prove themselves. And one funny thing I've actually found out was that there was this team called this League of Legends team called Hotshot GG and Friends, I think it was. And I don't think somebody correct me if I'm wrong. If you play esports and know about this stuff, correct me if I'm wrong. But I think they were just a team that's just finding people to play with online, I think it was. And they got Team Siren, right? And it was streamed on whatever streaming platform, and it kind of went. I don't think teams. I don't remember if Team Siren didn't do so well or what, but basically, their leader was really trash talking the other guys' team like constantly, and it's being kind of more toxic than the stereotype of men actually being toxic to women and stuff like that. One of the team members actually apologized for the team's existence because it kind of, it probably did worse for women playing the game than if they didn't exist.
Yeah, that's right. If people are seeing all that negativity coming from them, they really should have. Since they were among the first, they should really have been kind of like a flagship team and putting their best foot forward.
Exactly. Yeah, and I believe it was following this that. A Russian company, I think it's Russian, but Vivictus Esports assembled their own female pro team. Now, I believe Team Siren wasn't the pro team because they never went pro, but this was the team that was assembled for that professional gaming scene. And they kept losing game after game in embarrassing losses, like 13 minutes or something like that, which is kind of unheard of. I think that's the long. I don't know if it was the shortest or the longest that they stayed in, but see, I'm clearly not all that qualified to talk about this, but I'm
not into esports, so anyway.
Right, yeah. But and what they had to do was file these discrimination complaints against certain opponent companies like Rox and Vega, something about accusing them of, well, first of discrimination, and the other is of delaying the gameplay or something. So it was a very, it's a strange but predictable way to actually kind of keep themselves relevant in the competitive scene, keep them afloat, I suppose.
Yes.
So,
as you say, I would have, it's not. I would have probably predicted something like that. Unfortunately, or not terribly surprised that occurred. So, what happened with the complaints? Were any of them upheld, or?
Well,
are they still ongoing?
No. It was a couple of years back.
Oh, right.
I didn't go deep dive into what happened after. I'm assuming, people didn't like that the Russian team, the Vivictus Esports, were doing this. Yeah. So there were some complaints. People were seeing some of the bullshit happening. Now, last I checked, that female team that they just assembled were they were, after being kicked off of the main competitive circuit, I suppose they were
for not being good enough.
Right. They basically stuck with competing against other women's teams.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So so I guess this kind of brings us to a bit of an interesting subject. Sex segregation in the more intellectual field of competitive games, like say esports and chess. As opposed to the physical ones, which I think the physical differences are more obvious. So, do you have any opinions on the differentiation of the sexes there on those kinds of competitive?
Oh, absolutely, I do. So, chess is the one that often comes to mind. It's not the only one though, but there's an open category for open. I don't know. I don't know if league is quite the right word, but there's sort of essentially an open table for chess in which men and women can compete, and then there's a women's group where the women can compete. And I think the top female player is at about position 200 or something like that from when I looked at it previously. I think there are a few reasons for that. Women tend to be more risk averse than men, and risky behavior can certainly be beneficial in gameplay and so forth. But I do think there's another reason, and I've written about this, and it's male variability. I think I have mentioned it before briefly, but
let's
essentially
that again.
It's pretty solid evidence at this point that men vary more than women in a variety of ways. I wrote an article for Voice for Men around about 2015, and while I was researching the article, I knew about a whole bunch of different areas. And I discovered that they just discovered at the time that men vary more than women in personality. So if you took two random women and you picked two random women in the community, you picked two random men, the men would be more likely to have dissimilar personalities. So there's really solid evidence. And the problem, of course, as far as feminists are concerned about male variability is it explains a lot about how the world works without anyone having to be discriminated against. And they really don't like that at all. But anyway, so aside from anything else, risk-taking behaviour or anything like that, just the fact that there's greater variability among men would tend to put men at the top of the table. Of course, it would also in many cases put men at the bottom of the table, but as being poor players, but you don't see those people. So there's something of an observer bias going on there. Where you see the people at the top and you go, oh, 90% or 95% of those are men. There must be some sort of discrimination going on. Well, no, not necessarily, actually, because you're simply seeing the best of the best. There's an argument that I've heard some people talking about this topic, describing men as sort of the test pilots in our species, where the species can sort of absorb that a little bit more if they have greater variability among the men. So that's one of the arguments about why that might exist. And of course, the Y chromosome itself, being a lone chromosome rather than having a pair, of course, naturally promotes variability. So anyway, I think that really explains a lot of it. And chess is a really interesting one because I guess IQ matters, memory matters to some extent, but there's the physical characteristics don't matter and so forth. There's a whole lot of things that don't matter in chess.
Right.
And then you very clearly have an open category and a women's category.
Exactly. Yeah. It's enough to make you ask the question, right? I mean, if this is the more intellectual realm, why do we need this kind of discrimination as much? But as you say, there are factors that play in. Now, in terms of like socialization of children, this kind of an interesting thing that kind of plays in. To be very good at chess, you probably don't need this so much if you're a male, I think. But so do you know the chess champion Susan Polgar?
No, name doesn't ring a bell. Go on.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So she's a pretty high-profile chess player and has won women's tournaments and everything. She's the reason I started asking the question is because I saw her being interviewed in a Bobby Fischer documentary.
Right.
But be that as it may, basically what happened with her was that she and her two sisters were part of a sort of an upbringing educational experiment by their father, Laszlo Polgar. And basically just saying, if you really train a child from very early on, from an incredibly early age, they'll excel at something like that. Now let's assume that basically worked out for Susan, and she was able to compete in women's chess the way she did. But women in general don't seem to girls rather, they're less likely to be socialized this way at that age, right?
Mm.
They're more kind of given the princess treatment, and
Mm.
and it seems like they're raised somewhat in a way that the world kind of owes you, right?
Yeah, certainly in the
Right.
Western world, and I'd like to think that it hasn't always been this way, even in the
Yeah,
Western world.
sure.
I do think to my own grandparents' generation, which was the generation that were adults, young adults during World War II,
Mhm.
and I think of both of my own grandmothers, and one of them was in the Women's Land Army, and the other was working during the war. And it did seem like they just sort of got stuck in and did what needed to be done. So, but certainly in the modern Western world, yes, we're definitely seeing this problem.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned about young girls and young boys too. There certainly is. I think there are. There's the whole nature versus nurture argument that's been going on for decades. I personally think it's probably a bit of a component for both.
Right.
It is interesting to see differences in even among young children in terms of how they how focused they can be on particular topics and so forth. And I do suspect we do see something of more of a single-mindedness among young boys.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect at least part of that may be innate, but I do think that there are definitely both a nurture and a nature component.
And it manifests itself in different ways too. Sometimes it's due to an extreme love of something, but other times it's an escape.
Good point.
Right, sure, yeah, because we're still on the subject of chess. I was thinking about Bobby Fischer himself.
Yeah.
It was according to the documentary that once I think it was the moment he found out that the guy that was living with them was not his real biological father. I think he started to become more distant and retreat from that, and maybe retreat more from his mother, I suppose. And I think that was kind of what pushed him away from a normal childhood and into the world of chess. So it could be right.
You'll think there was an escape, of course, and he did. I think he did show quite a lot of talent quite early on. So I guess that was probably natural for him. He probably enjoyed it because he was doing well with it as well. Yeah, so
the talent was natural, but he needed that push.
Yeah, that's true, because there are people who are talented in areas and don't pursue them for one reason or another. That's right. Talent. That's right. It will get you started, but you also have to love it and have that passion and the drive to achieve it.
Right. Now,
Bobby Fischer. Go on.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Bobby Fischer is an interesting character too, actually.
He is. Yes.
Yeah, the conflict he had with the chess authorities later in life and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Quite a bit. He completely went off the rails. But even before, he was incredibly awkward. He didn't like any press people. He would like throw matches or at least delay them if he catches any press people in the airport, trying to get a shot of him or get an interview with him or try to catch him on video. He would run. He would bolt. He would just.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right? Do you know who else didn't like that? Albert Einstein. He although he didn't run away as far as I know, but he actually didn't especially enjoy the fame that his achievements brought him. Right. There's a fairly famous photo of him sticking his tongue out, and that's actually because yet again he had a reporter at his face. He just stuck his tongue out. It's probably been the most famous photo of Albert Einstein ever. So, by the way, while we're on the topic, some feminists have been claiming that Albert Einstein ripped off his wife's work. I think it was his first wife. So I don't know if you've heard that claim around Vernon. It was circulating a few years ago, maybe not so much in the last couple of years, but the claim was that they often make these claims that you've got male scientists and mathematicians sort of just ripping off the work of women. And I think there's plenty of examples of the other way too. But anyway, that's another topic.
Exactly. Because one thing that springs immediately to mind was Henrietta Swan Leavitt, who discovered the luminosity principle when it comes to the stellar luminosity. I think it was. Mm-hmm. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was that was something like that. But she was kind of cited as like this big she was given particular attention. I think, she deserves the credit, sure, but everybody makes a big deal about how women were not allowed to operate the telescopes and be paid at the same time, or some kind of crap like that. But there's like a lot of gynocentrism happening in trying to interpret these kind of things.
Yeah, and when you often look at that sort of thing, it's often the case in the sciences too that it'll be the principal, what they now call the principal investigator, who's the head of the research project. They're the ones who get their names on that, and it's often the junior scientists who do the actual work. And of course, then they rise up, and eventually they're the principal investigator, and the cycle continues. But I don't know much about that particular case, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised if she was a junior scientist, and that was more likely to be the reason. Yeah. I mean, Hedy Lamarr is an interesting example. So Hedy Lamarr, of course, actress from the 40s. She is credited. I mean, very credited with a few different things. Some people say she invented Wi-Fi, which is really cute. In the
Bluetooth, wasn't it? Was it Wi-Fi? Or
no, it's actually. So it's a technology. Well, so some people claim that she invented Wi-Fi. That's not the case. What she did was she is a co-discoverer of a frequency hopping technology that was originally. And by the way, the person who co-discovered this with her was a man by the name of George Antle, who you won't hear much about because Hedy Lamarr apparently did it all on her own. So poor old George is being ignored here, which wasn't exactly what the feminists keep claiming that men are doing to women. Anyway, poor old George is being forgotten. So what they did was they co-developed this technology. Interestingly enough, they had 88 frequencies. Now, George was a pianist, right? They had 88 frequencies, and it just so happens there are 88 keys on the keyboard of a piano. So they think that this is where they got the idea from. Anyway, the idea is that you have a torpedo. During World War II, the Germans were able to jam the radio-controlled torpedoes. The idea was you have this frequency hopping technology where the radio frequency keeps jumping, so it's much harder to jam. They never actually implemented their idea, but something very similar is used in Wi-Fi, which is where this idea comes from. But Hedy Lamarr did not invent Wi-Fi. She is the co-discoverer of a frequency hopping technology, along with a man, poor old George Antle, that everyone has forgotten. So, Marie Curie is another one. Marie Curie, now she was actually far more junior than her husband. Her husband was about 20 years older than her. Yeah. And he was already an established professor when she basically got to Paris and they met. She then started doing research on radiation, and he was doing something else. They got married, and they were doing research in the same lab. And after a year or so, he saw that her research was really going places, and he was really quite fascinated by it. He actually stopped his own research and started helping her. So then they worked together. That was Pierre. They also worked with a gentleman by the name of Henri Becquerel. And he was working in another lab, but I believe that they did collaborate. They were both in Paris. They ended up sharing a Nobel Prize, the three of them. Okay. So anyway, Marie Curie, you often hear how she discovered radiation. Well, actually, she did it in conjunction with a couple of men who were both experienced, a senior and a recognized scientist when she came on the scene. Now, Henri, I think, died of radiation-related illness, and poor Pierre, who apparently always had his head in the clouds, was hit by a car when he stepped out in front of a car in Paris. Cars weren't quite new at the time, and he stepped out onto the road without looking and was hit by a car and died. But Marie continued their work. So she did do some advances on her own later on. Yeah. But again, we have a case where poor old Pierre and Henri are both forgotten, and Marie gets all the credit.
Yeah, wasn't Becquerel the guy who discovered that you didn't need the sun to actually kind of get like radiation results? I think it was like you just stick a piece of I might be thinking of a completely different person, but it might have been Becquerel because the name sounds familiar. Basically taking a piece of uranium, like he was going to experiment with the sunlight at first, but it was raining, so he kind of had to put it off and just shelved away the project. But he decided to develop the photographic plate anyway. Who knows why he did that, but discovered that the plate was fogged, and
right. So up to that, I didn't know. So up to that point, because it was, I did study Becquerel, but it was a long time ago, some decades ago.
I was sure it was Becquerel. I might be getting it wrong. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I might check actually afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got a radiation. He's got a becquerels actually. Becquerel is a unit of measuring. So it's been a while since I studied physics.
Okay.
But measuring some aspect of radiation. I don't recall what it was. But anyway, so Marie gets, of course, all the credit, and poor old Henri and Pierre are forgotten. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I can't resist bringing this up. What about in the world of classical music? Like, we were talking, everybody's talking about, how women were represented, and that's why we don't have any big women composers or something like that. But was it really discrimination, or is it just men are just overwhelmingly the nuts who are able to come up with cool stuff?
Funny you mention music in particular, because Camille Paglia has a famous quote that I really love. The reason there is no female Mozart is because there's no female Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the quote.
Right.
Hopefully, it gets taken in context. It's like, because some people might interpret that as, men are dangerous biologically or something like that. But if you were to offer a defense,
I think it'd be interesting actually to hear what other people think about this, but my interpretation of that statement is that she's recognizing male variability. Mm-hmm. She's basically saying that men, because of the variability in men, and I suppose you could also say risk-taking and so forth as well, because of those characteristics, yes, you're more likely to see violent men in the sense of criminal men engaging criminal behavior and so forth. But you're also more likely to see men who are then achieving greatness in music and other fields. Yeah. Right. So I guess it is probably initially my interpretation was male variability, but now I think about it, it's other aspects as well, like risk-taking and even an inclination to not necessarily follow the rules. We know this that women are more likely to follow the rules, and we know that the criminal justice system discriminates against men. Right. But that alone does not explain the variation. There are, I think, it's no doubt that men are more likely to commit certain classes of crimes. And that's why men are generally less likely to follow rules, I think. But this is both good and bad. In say, a school setting, the girls are going to get on better because they're following the rules, and the boys are going to get in trouble more often. But on the other hand, the person who achieves greatness is the person who says, you know what, everyone in my life has told me this isn't possible. I'm going to go do it anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're both rule breaking. Right.
And to follow off on this, and when it does sometimes happen with women, it's a big, national historical celebration, because
it certainly is now.
It's like, I had no idea what the feminists are complaining when it comes to like the underrepresentation, because, that stereotype that women can't do so much has helped women get so much attention when it does happen.
Mm. Yes, that's true. That's true. But also too, I've spent a few years researching my book, and I've written a few articles and done a few videos on it and so forth. But I think once the book's out, I hope people hopefully people will read it, and I'll get a bit of a better idea of what I'm getting at here. But honestly, every era I look at, every aspect of life I look at, there's a bunch of guys doing stuff, and there are women doing it as well. And interestingly enough, it's often the case that the men don't mind at all. In most cases, not all, but in most cases, it does seem that women aren't actually subject to that much discrimination. In fact, one of the suppositions, you heard it here first, is one of the suppositions that I developed while I was actually writing the book. I haven't said this before, actually, so I'm letting the cat out of the bag a little bit.
Okay.
One of the opinions I formed was, after looking at this over many years, is that in general, when a woman wants to step into what had been the traditionally male realm, the men let her. That really seems to be the case. Joan of Arc is a classic example. Here's a young girl, she's about 15, right? Mm-hmm. And she's leading men in battle. I mean, if the society was really that patriarchal, they'd just never let her. They would never let her do it. They would never let her go anywhere near the position of power or leading men. But time and time again, what you see is the society, these women, because it's a small number of women, but they are stepping up and they're saying, I want to do this, or I can do this, or I've got this. And the men around them are going, yeah, no problem at all.
Right. And
that's what I see.
Yeah, I think your opinion is almost very easily verifiable, because, say you got this gang of a bunch of nerds, right? Like they're playing some kind of game like Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, or some video games. Now, their first instinct is not going to be, girls aren't allowed here, or at least that's kind of there's some alignment towards that kind of thing anyway. But instead, it's like, when they first find that girl, which, shares in their hobby, finally a girl that gets us, they're welcomed in almost in droves, almost to a fault.
Yeah, absolutely. And being a bit of a geek myself, I would say that is absolutely true. A lot of areas I've been involved in, a lot of areas where it's overwhelmingly male from an interest point of view, and all of those groups would like more women involved.
Right. And a big example is the heavy metal community, is because, there's a bit of a paradox here. They want women, the guys want women in their community. They want more women to listen in the audience. They want more women to play. But at the same time, they love to bring up that whole disparity of women and metal music thing. They love to virtue signal about that. It's kind of shameful, actually. But yes.
And a lot of it probably just comes down to, as we still see with so many other areas, it just comes down to women not having the same interests as men in many cases. Now, you can argue whether that's socialized or not or whatever, but the reality is men and women, by the time they reach adulthood, have distinctly different interests. I mean, I started I'm a bit of a Linux geek. For those who don't know, I do occasionally mention this. Sitting in front of a Linux system doing a C, you can do everything out Windows. I'm sitting in front of a Linux system using Zoom right now. So anyway, I actually started a Unix user group back in the mid-90s. And one day somebody posted on Usenet, which is some people may not have heard of, but Usenet was an early form of, you could call it social media, dating all the way back from the 1980s. Anyway, this young woman suggested that the computer club I'd started was a boys' club, and it was actively excluding women. I was quite shocked at this, because like we said before, it was actually the opposite. Pretty much everyone in the club would have loved more women to be involved. And I said this, and we've actually said we'd like more women to be involved. So I said to the young woman, said, why don't you come along to the next meeting and you can be my guest, and I'll show you around.
Right.
And what I was sort of getting at. I spent a while writing the reply. And what I was getting at to her is, don't feel worried. There are all lots of men there. Come and I'll show you around, and we're all cool. And she said, oh, thanks, I'll get back to you. And I never heard back from her.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, now, speaking of the men welcoming women in what some would call their own spaces, what about female MRAs?
Right. So if anything, they do tend to be, and even MRAs tend to do this a bit, they tend to put the women on a bit of a pedestal. Yep. And it's probably partly the fact that they're just happy that these women are there, but there's no doubt that women who get involved get more interest than men who are involved.
Exactly.
And definitely get priority in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, a positive example being the Honey Badgers, Elizabeth Hobson.
That's right.
But negative examples being the likes of Chloe Roma, who completely drift off of,
Yeah. That's right. Exactly. That's right.
Sure.
So
Peter Wright has a question that's actually related to this. So he says, Allison Tiemann recently reported that HB podcasts are receiving a large increase in female viewers. Likewise, AVFM female readership has doubled in number recently. Would either of you like to speculate about possible reasons for this spike of interest in MR viewpoint?
Okay, I don't know if you want to go first, Vernon, or do you want me to?
Yeah, you go first.
I hadn't heard Peter's question before, so I'm sort of answering cold. However, It is a topic that sort of has come up before, and in the past, I think it has increased recently. A Voice for Men female viewership. I think even in the past, a few years ago, the numbers were higher than had previously been expected. I think there's possibly a few reasons for this. I think there's evidence that men are holding back from relationships and so forth. People talk about the marriage. They look at marriage rates and they say, the marriage rates have been declining slightly. But I think marriage is the wrong metric. Look at cohabitation and relationships. Relationships are hard to track, but cohabitation is actually fairly easy to track. and the proportion of men who are not cohabitating with anybody has something like tripled in the last 20 or 30 years, whereas the number of women who are not cohabitating has gone up a little bit. And I really do think that between MGTOW and a much larger group of men who are stepping back from relationships but don't particularly choose to call themselves anything, I do think that a lot of young women are really noticing this. And I think that this is probably provoking some interest among young women. So I do think that this is actually something that is being seen in the younger generation.
So do you think it's more of a defensive reaction, or do they actually care about men?
Somewhere in between. I tend to probably across a large enough group of people, yes, in both cases. I tend to be one who views these things as not necessarily distinct. There's the self-interest and interest towards helping others don't necessarily have to be exclusionary. So,
of course not. I'll be the first to tell you that.
Right. So I think that they probably do see the issues, because we had in the men's rights Facebook groups in particular, it doesn't happen so much now, but for about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a real spate of young women coming in and being really supportive and saying things like, I get it, I see the problems, I want to help men and so forth. And kind of unfortunately, I don't blame the young men for doing this, but a lot of them got really negative responses from the young men, because a lot of them of the young men, it's already gone too far, and they've really been burned by all this, right? So a lot of them weren't really interested in the fact that the young women were doing this. Yeah. And a lot of the young women, I think, probably got a bit burned out. We saw that a lot. It was quite common about 4 or 5 years ago. And I do suspect that they're coming in, they are genuinely concerned for men, but at the same time, I think there probably is an aspect of self-interest there. Why not? Yeah.
Right.
I don't see a problem with that.
Exactly. Like, I think a good, if I may be so bold, is to have like a litmus test for women who are coming into this movement. So if gynocentrism disappears tomorrow, are you going to be happy? Those are like, or what do you care about men?
Right.
What do you care about men without using, why do you care without using the words, sacrifice, provider, protector, and all the myriad kind of things? So I think, I keep asking those questions. Some people have told me I'm wasting my time, but I want to keep pressing it, because those are the questions that need to be addressed for women in the men's movement, I think, because it's, I think those are the right questions. It's not what, it's not, if you don't want to be seen as a siren trying to bring men back to the plantation, then I think those are absolutely fair questions. I think the question's a little too nice, actually.
Actually, you bring up a really good point there, actually, not just for women, but for men too, actually. We get a steady stream of people who come in and who fundamentally misunderstand what the men's rights movement is about. And most of them probably move on fairly quickly, but when they figure it out. But basically, they've mistaken it for traditionalism. And our opponents often make that claim that it's about traditionalism. So it's probably not that surprising that some men who are upset with say, feminism will come in and then see that we're actually not being traditionalists. We're actually talking about a new path forward for men and so forth, where they're living their own lives and valuing their own life as much as the life of women and so forth. So a lot of those guys, I've seen them in the Facebook groups and so forth, they get quite annoyed with us after a while. And this is a good example of how anti-feminism is so much broader than men's rights. There's a lot of traditionalist anti-feminists, whereas that's not what men's rights is about. And our opponents among feminists will generally claim we're traditionalists, but we're really not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was actually kind of worried about that when I first entered the movement, right? But to my pleasant surprise, there were a lot that shared my viewpoint that, traditionalism, what I call neo-traditionalism, because there's some aspect of traditionalism in which men and women are kind of at least paired in terms of labor.
That is
complementary. Yeah. So this is why I'm trying to be careful to refer to them as neo-trads or gyno-trads or something like that.
Yes. That's right. Gynocentric traditionalism is another term that we've used. And so I do want to, that's right, I should clarify my own position. Not everything that's traditional is bad.
Right.
As you say, there were many, in fact, one of the suppositions I have in the book too is that many societies were essentially balanced, in that men had responsibilities like going to war and maybe having to die for the community, but that was balanced against other things. And that was a balance that society had. our society is unbalanced. We're now looking for something new because we're now past that point. But I think there were traditional societies where men got a lot of respect in society because they knew if the chips were down, it was the men who were really going to have to step up and protect the community. That's gone, of course, but and now, of course, men got a lot of hate for it. So
Exactly.
anyway, so you're right. There were aspects of traditionalism that I think were fine, at least because they were balanced. But yes, there is also gynocentric traditionalism.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So I think you had a lot of subjects you want to talk about today. I know I've kind of dominated most of this half hour, but
Oh, no, it's good. No, it's good. I think we've had good discussion. So I wanted to bring up Russian mobilization. So basically, everyone will know that Vladimir Putin has now ordered a partial mobilization. Now, the figure of 300,000 men being mobilized was discussed. That was apparently mentioned by a Russian general, but that's probably a fairly conservative figure. And the real number, it's believed now, may be closer to 1 million. So men that are at least they're trying to target for mobilization. But there's some interesting aspects. Well, first of all, obviously, it's only men who are being mobilized. So this is men who are being sent off to war. So they're supposed to have some military training, but that may have been many years ago. And they're apparently only going to get very minimal training before going to fight. So these men, quite frankly, many of them are going to die and be injured. And I personally think it'll be absolutely devastating for Russian society. I think that the Russians are going to be paying for this war demographically for decades. That's sort of probably the best case scenario. But there's also another aspect that's come up that it appears that some of the ethnic minorities in Russia are actually being prioritized for mobilization. It is true that poorer men are more likely to go into the army, so that there's a much higher proportion of injuries among the people in the groups in certain areas of Siberia, for example, versus Moscow. And it is true that poorer men are more likely to go into the army, and so therefore more likely to be injured. But even accounting for that, they're talking about figures like 5 times the injury rate, and for in certain parts of Siberia among the men who have gone to war so far in this war versus Moscow. So it does look like they're targeting the Russian government is targeting ethnic minorities to try to get them into the army. So we've got a few different aspects go there. Obviously, we've got men being sent off to war without adequate training, but we've also got the fact that men who are sort of the poorer part of society who are being dragged to war as well.
Yeah, this is actually kind of an interesting counter argument to those who say that we don't think men are disposable. We send men to war because they're the most qualified. Well, this is a perfect counterpoint to that one, because they don't care if they don't they aren't trained and are up to skill level that are needed. They're just kind of there to be thrown away.
Exactly, that's right. It really is just a very, very clear example of male disposability, where they're just really being thrown into the grinder at this point. Yeah. So this is, and yet again, I mean, Russia suffered lost about 10% of the population during World War II, or what the Soviets called the Great Patriotic War. But it was mostly men. It is true that women fought in large numbers in the Soviet army, but nevertheless, particularly the majority of the frontline combat was done by men, and it was overwhelmingly men that died. And there was a huge gender disparity, actually. And I've asked some people who lived during that era in the Soviet Union. I was always fascinated how a society would cope with that. What happened? And so there were a significant proportion of missing men, close to 1 in 10. And the question is, well, how did they cope with that? Especially in a society, plural marriage isn't acceptable in Russian society. So what were they doing? Yeah. And apparently the answer that I've been given by people who lived at that time is that many of the men had affairs, and this was kind of an open secret. Yeah. And those women who weren't married often fell pregnant, and the entire society just tolerated this because there were so many missing men.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to happen again. They're going to have huge numbers of missing men again between the dead men and the injured men, who are also then going to have trouble finding, working in a lot of jobs after the war and so forth, and be a drain on the society. But I think that we're going to see this again in Russian society.
Exactly. Yeah. Sure. So, I know I won't shut up about this movie, but I need to buy you a DVD copy of Seven Samurai at some point, because it's about a samurai like defending a village against bandits, right? And so they've mobilized the villagers into being soldiers so they can fight them back. But nobody is expendable. And everybody was treated. They were trained. Up until the point that the bandits come, and deaths are seen as tragic. It's like
right.
They're coming to kill us, but we've got to fight. Instead of living like vassals to be parasited off of by the bandits. So I think there's some good messages when it comes to fighting a necessary war.
Yes, that's right. They don't want to, but they have to fight to defend their community. But yes, that doesn't mean they're going to be thrown into the grinder. They're actually still they're being trained properly. I'm aware of the film, but I've never actually seen it.
Got to see it. It's so good.
I'll see it.
Right, sure. Because there's even nobody's like a human shield, right? Nobody is sent to die and everything like that. It's like
nothing like the red shirts in Star Trek. Then where. The joke is if you're on Kirk's security team and you're called to the transporter room, you better have your affairs in order.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
But there's a tactic they use in this movie is a very interesting take on that proverb. Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, because I know it's more like a relational metaphor most of the time, but one tactic they use in the film is that they would, when the bandits come charging, they block off everyone except one, maybe two soldiers, and let them through so they can take care of those in short order with the villagers. So it's really like war philosophy of war in a very good way.
Yep.
Yeah. So
while we're on the topic of movies. I saw a Japanese movie a few years ago. I don't remember what it was called, but it was set during the Meiji Restoration, which was a restoration of the monarchy, for those who don't know, and the Japanese monarchy. So anyway, this guy was a samurai, and towards the end of the period of the samurai, around the time of the Meiji Restoration, the samurai were being put to, they didn't need these warriors anymore, and they're being put to sort of all sorts of jobs. And this guy was basically a clerk. And he was managing, I don't know, warehouses or something. Anyway, but of course he's a trained samurai. But anyway, so the story goes on about how he's actually there's sort of another samurai's gone a bit rogue, and he's actually sent to deal with him for various reasons. But this guy he's a samurai, but he's on minimum wage because apparently the samurai weren't being paid very well. And he's got a wife and a young daughter to look after, and a mother and a young daughter. His wife's died, mother and a young daughter to look after. Anyway, great Japanese movie that I saw a few years ago. I love watching a lot of non-English speaking cinema. I find is often of a higher quality than English language cinema, in my experience. There's a number of Israeli films I've seen that I really enjoy. Okay. I'm monolingual, so I'm always reading the subtitles. But South Korean, Japanese, Israeli, all sorts of other nationalities. There are great movies out there.
Yep, yeah. For the monolinguistic among us, which I'm assuming is most, try and find ones with good subtitles, because some of them are just horrible. Some of them really missed the mark, but some are good. So yeah. So I watched Squid Game a few months ago. I don't know if you know about Squid Games, South Korean. I know what it is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Great. So for those who don't know, Squid Game is essentially a South Korean series, I guess, probably 8 episodes or something like that. Oh gosh, how much do I give away? You know what? I'm not going to give anything away about Squid Game.
Okay. All right. Well, if you do, I'll just say spoilers, and you can just whatever.
I was just going to say that there was some about the subtitles. There were some interesting discussions around. There was a term used in the which actually couldn't be translated, and it was an honorific term for one man to use for another man who's senior. So I think the idea was a man would use it to a senior colleague at work.
So Japan has a term called senpai. Yeah. So I wonder if it's the equivalent of that.
Right. So, okay. So that's a term that you might use to someone who's senior in a work. So not necessarily a boss, but someone who's sort of more senior in their role.
Someone who is your senior, basically, even by like a small margin.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So they I think they translated it as uncle or something like that. Yeah. So in some, they actually got some criticism over that translation, but they made the point that it was actually a pretty hard word to translate.
Okay. Well, speaking of that word, so there are horrible translations of Japanese that try to, they're just trying to say old man, but they use the term uncle because the words are same, but the Japanese can differentiate the context. It's like,
yes,
we know we're not talking about someone's uncle, but uncle is always used, and similar for grandpa or grandma or something like that. Or big brother or big sister, so it gets like, because in Japan, I'm assuming in the more Asian speaking, the Asian cultures, is that you would actually, it's you don't really refer to somebody all the time by their name. Sometimes if there's a more if you don't know their name, you call them something else, like what would be mistranslated as big brother or something like that.
Right. And it's like an honorific title that you
of sorts. Yeah.
Respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that probably sounds something similar. Yeah. So anyway, it was interesting that they got some criticism over their choice of the translation, but they made the point that it was actually pretty hard to translate this into English. So
sure, yeah.
Anyway, yes. And in fact, something we didn't mention at the beginning, of course, with the Goalpost series, we've discussed it in the first few episodes. We primarily talked about issues specifically relating to men's rights and anti-feminism and so forth. But going forward, we're going to be talking about a wide variety of topics, which was naturally happening anyway, to be honest. But we're going to be talking about a wide variety of topics, but really from a men's rights or anti-feminist perspective. So,
or a red pill's perspective.
Or red pill's perspective. That's right. Anything and everything could be discussed, including Japanese movies. Yeah. Yes.
Really, I can buy you a DVD of it, or if you're a Blu-ray watcher, I can get you a Blu-ray Criterion collection of it.
I think I'll see what I can do on streaming, and I'll see if I can watch it actually before the next Goalpost.
Right. I mean, like a 3.5-hour movie this addictive, is rare for me.
Right.
Like I watched it last night.
Oh, nice. Yeah. You know what? You've got me really interested, actually, because I do like a good movie like that. I'm actually pretty picky with movies, but that sounds like it might be something I'd like. Das Boot. Have you ever watched Das Boot?
My wife has.
Okay. I highly recommend Das Boot.
Or my brother or my wife. I don't remember if they... it was one of them.
So I originally watched it a long time ago. Then I watched the, I think it was the director's cut that was 4.5 hours. And then I found out that there was a mini-series version that's 6 hours long. And I haven't yet managed to watch the mini-series version, but I do plan to at some stage when it becomes available to me. So I really like Das Boot. Watched it a number of times. Anyway, it's a very interesting story about a U-boat crew. Most people probably know about it, but U-boat crew, and it's interesting to see it from the side of Germany during World War II. But of course, this is a crew completely composed of men. There were no women on U-boats and so forth or any military vessels during World War II. So we have a lot of men there taking great risks, and it's a lot of it is about the stress they experience and so forth. So fantastic, worth watching.
Absolutely, I'll definitely make it a point to watch it.
So the next topic I had, I guess, was I had Russian mobilization, but war in general, I suppose, is we've probably already talked about the aspect of male disposability that I wanted to talk about. But this is something we said before that in the past there was that balance in society that isn't there anymore, in terms of the men have still got those responsibilities, but don't have the rights or perhaps the accolades that come along with those responsibilities. Well, I've got one more thing I was going to mention. I don't know if you've got anything else
No, I
there.
don't think so. Yeah, go right ahead.
The Prime Minister of the UK. So the UK economy is not in a good way at the moment.
Okay.
Yep. So Liz Truss has been Prime Minister for about. Liz got mentioned. So we talked about Liz Truss last time.
Yes.
So she originally was. They had something. We mentioned this last time. The role was Minister for Equality and Women, I think was the title.
Mm-hmm.
She got rid of and women and was going to make a Minister for Equality and put a man in the role. Apparently, she's backtracked on that now. Now, you mentioned something that Liz Truss had done that was, now what was that again? That she was a bit more negative and...
There was something about her trying to make catcalling illegal or something like that.
That's it. That's right. Yes. I actually meant to look into that, but I hadn't looked into that. Liz Truss is, of course, a lot of this happened when she was in other ministerial roles. Liz Truss is now, of course, the Prime Minister. That's, of course, why she's appointing the ministerial roles. But she's done something called a mini budget, and the mini budget's possibly causing the British economy to implode. They've lost a lot of value in the pound in the last month. It's actually quite concerning. So she might not be in office for very long, in all honesty. So if things don't turn themselves around,
right,
it's causing quite a problem at the moment.
Yeah, and did I hear you correctly? He talked about a minister for men that she's backtracking on, or is that a minister for women?
No, it was the role was Minister for Equality, and she put a man in the role.
Okay.
Which really upset feminists. She seems to have what I understand, she's backtracked on that now, and I think it may be another. There may be either a minister for women again, or it may be returned to the original role. So, but yeah, she seems. Which I was really disappointed because I was actually really quite impressed by that. That she put a man in this role called Minister for Equality, but even if that hadn't made a difference initially, just the fact that she made that choice I thought was really interesting. But yeah, she's backtracked. So anyway, Liz Truss may not be Prime Minister of the UK for very long. We'll see. If she doesn't turn the economy around, it's quite bad.
Right. Okay. Oh, speaking of women, women in positions of power. So what about that new Italian Prime Minister?
Right. So I don't know much about her. She's come up on the scene, and unfortunately, usually I try to do a bit of research. I haven't had an opportunity to research her.
Well, we can save it for next time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess all I'll say is that some people have called her a fascist, but then I've heard from other people that's not quite right. So it'll be interesting to see what the situation is. And
here's the thing, it's one of those things, like anything to the right of far left is fascist for those kind of people. And we're talking about Italy here, which had you can't shake off the Mussolini thing. If it was
this is true,
right, and if it was in Germany, then hell would even more be broken loose.
the original fascists were in Italy, indeed, because that was the fascist party, of course. Yeah. So yes, unfortunately, that's right. I guess it's going to be that. But as you say, the term fascist and terms like alt-right get thrown around. I've been called alt-right, and I'm not any sort of right. I'm really not. I never have been.
Yeah, he's to those who don't know, Rob has stated many times that you're more of a left or center kind of moderate kind of.
So I called myself left until about 8 years ago, and I stopped calling myself left because I became so disgusted with what the left had become. But that doesn't mean I changed my position. So many people on listening to my opinion would probably still call me a left, but yeah, it's I don't identify that way anymore by virtue of what the term now implies. Unfortunately, you could probably call me a classical liberal. Anyway, that would be probably not a bad place to start. So yeah,
and
I'm certainly not right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I myself, I might categorize myself as right by virtue of not really being on the left, but I've made but I've made arguments.
That's how the left defines it now.
Yeah, but I've made in some of my videos, somebody accused me of being a Marxist. So just because I'm talking about men's well-being, and they accuse me of being a victim mentality, whatever, something like that. Kind of that neo-trad right kind of. So like I don't think we can be pigeonholed here in this red pill community so much. We're
Exactly. That's right. People, the men's rights, people really cross the political gamut. And I was going to say, we also get called, right wing by the left and left wing by the right,
exactly.
which I think probably means we're in moderates actually, and probably if we're annoying both sides, we might be doing something right.
yeah, doing something right or doing something moderate.
Doing something correct.
Right.
Yes. So we have been I've had people do that sort of thing too, where each side seems to think you're on the other side. Well, that probably makes me a moderate actually, which is funny because we're often accused of being extremists. Voice for Men is banned on Facebook. If you attempt to type a voiceformen.com on Facebook, and don't do this because it's really annoying, it actually basically kills your comment. And you actually can't delete it.
Yeah. Well, in Facebook, I actually refer to it as the big bad site.
It's a bit of a joke. That's right. You have to use code words exactly. You can't get. That's right. And it took me 2 hours one Saturday morning to work. So if you type a voiceman.com, it'll block your message. You can't do it privately either. You can't even message someone and say, right. But it took me 2 hours one Saturday morning to work around it. I experimented a little bit. I tried doing a proxy redirect and so forth, where I put another URL in and automatically redirect to a Voice for Men. That actually worked initially for about half an hour, and then their systems picked it up, eventual consistency, and it stopped working. So, but what I've done is I wrote this script, which I wrote it one Saturday morning. For every article on A Voice for Men, there's a corresponding article on Wiki for Men, and you post the Wiki for Men link, and the Wiki for Men link explains that on Facebook, A Voice for Men is banned. Click the link below to go to A Voice for Men. And because it involves an actual click by the user and it's not an automatic redirect, Facebook can't block this. So, Right, it wouldn't make any sense. I mean, if they blocked every site that had ever linked to A Voice for Men, they'd take out too much. So, if anyone wants to link to a Voice for Men on Facebook or if any other of these social media sites end up doing the same thing, banning it, you just find the Wiki for Men link, and you provide that instead. And I've been doing that for the last couple of years since I wrote the script. And only ever got positive feedback on the way this works. Right.
So one thing I should probably mention here is that we have a True Social site, and so we're basically posting our articles there as they happen. I've been kind of behind on them. I'm the guy administrating it because I don't think True Social is good for Australia just yet.
No, that's right. I think it may still be limited to either US residents or US citizens. So I think it may be geolocating, I suspect, at least based on most. I suppose that means people could get around with VPNs and whatnot. But for the moment, that's right. Thank you very much, Vernon, for setting that up for A Voice for Men and managing that.
Yep.
Hopefully the rest of the world can get access to it soon.
Yeah, sure. Yep. So, it's basically just truesocial.com / @A Voice for Men, not the number. It's going to be A Voice for FOR Men. Yeah. So
same as the URL. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool.
So follow us there.
Yes, absolutely. And looking forward to being able to get access to it myself.
Yep. Absolutely.
So the last thing I had was just a quick one. Queen's birthday holiday, which is kind of interesting. So, of course, we in the Commonwealth realms now have a king. So I think I discussed it briefly, but I'll just run through it really quickly. So there are currently 15 countries that have Charles III as their king. So all these countries are technically in personal union, which is really a term we don't use much anymore, but that's effectively what it amounts to. They're all separate, but they all have the same king. The number's going to go down because it was 16 a few years ago before the Queen died. So one became a republic. Several countries in the Caribbean are scheduled to become republics in the next few years. I think it's 6. So that should probably take it down to 9. Anyway, so we've got the Queen's birthday holiday coming up, but it's kind of funny that it's actually in the legislation. It's actually called the Queen's birthday holiday because she was on the throne for 70 years. And even though we've got a king, we're having a Queen's birthday holiday tomorrow in my state. Because they haven't had a chance to change the name of the legislation, change the name of the holiday. So yes, anyway, I thought it was funny.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So that's yeah. I've got a nice day off tomorrow. So.
Right. Yeah. You also wanted to talk about the Routledge Handbook.
Yes, I think I'd like to spend a little bit more time on it. I hadn't had much time to research this week, so I think probably maybe let's leave it till next time. May I?
Yeah, sure. I'll put it in my notes here.
Yeah, sounds good. How are we going time-wise? Probably coming up not quite an hour, I think, by my calculation.
Well, actually, I think we've been a little bit past an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I'm just trying to check social media to see if there's anyone else leaving comments. I don't see any. So, anything else you wanted to kind of quickly breeze through?
No, I think that probably does it for this fortnight. So I will see you again in 2 weeks, and glad that you're okay with the hurricane.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Robert. Yeah. Okay.
Talk to you later.
Yeah. Talk to you later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.